Good evening and welcome to Our View, Our Seat in Poverty. This is a show that we produce on a monthly basis, and it just talks about what's happening in our community in relationship to poverty. I have with me tonight Kayla. Hi. Kayla Johnson is our employment trainer. And tonight we're joined by the Haven of Rest Executive Director, Daniel Jones. Welcome, Daniel.
Good evening. Thank you.
Yes. Tonight we're going to talk about homelessness in Battle Creek. So we started out this conversation a few weeks ago talking about in our office about what are the resources in our community if you don't have a home. So there's a lot of verbiage floating around in the community that relates to homelessness. So there's you're homeless, you're unhoused, you're couch surfing, those types of things. So those all qualify in our organization for someone to be homeless.
Yep.
So we were wondering, like, where do you go when you're homeless if you need to store your things or get an ID or take a shower or wash your clothes, or where do you even go if you need to sleep safely here in our community? So we've reached out to a couple of organizations that kind of partner together with us, the Haven of Rest, of course, and then the Share Center here in Battle Creek. So the Share Center currently is under construction to build showers and lockers, and they are looking to do some other things. They also provide case management for IDs, birth certificates, mental health and substance abuse help. They're kind of like a wraparound. They also do meals every day for folks. And so they're just an all-around resource in the community. And then we partner with the Haven of Rest. So Daniel, can you kind of tell us some of the stuff that you offer in our community?
You know, it's an entire environment, you're right, about services that exist to help out homeless folks. And the terms you used, unhoused or unsheltered, I mean, depends on just which term you want to use. So unsheltered people in our community. The Haven serves a population of men, women, and children. We've got 2 shelters, one for single men and then one for women and children who are either in families or single women, mom and dad with kids, even a teenage boy can certainly stay with the family unit as they present. In a given year, the Haven serves about 1,400 people. Last year, for sure, we served about 80,000 meals out of our little kitchen, which is kind of a miracle. And, you know, if you put one person in a bed overnight, it's one bed night. And so the Haven last year served about 36,000 bed nights of shelter, which is average maybe 100 people a night. So somewhere between 100 and 125 people a night. Where does a person go for meals and to store things and things like that? I mean, the Haven is and has been around since 1956. And we exist to serve a population that started with just single men, mostly war veterans who are kind of riding the rails between Detroit and Chicago. They'd stop in Battle Creek for a meal and a gospel message, since we are a faith-based institution. They'd get a shower and just a restful night. But in the last 67 years now, I guess, the average unsheltered person has evolved. The average homeless person has evolved. If you're talking about a homeless person nowadays, odds are you're talking about a woman with children or a family. And so we've evolved as well in our services, and really to not only just address the symptoms of homelessness, right? I mean, the actual presenting, hey, I need shelter, hey, I need food, I need care, and things like that. Those are the basic needs. There's always a root cause. Right?
Absolutely.
Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, today I'm going to be homeless.
Right.
It's not fun. It's not an adventure. And so when our case managers see people coming into our shelters, that's really the first question they ask is, what is causing your homeless situation? Homelessness itself is just the symptom. Something's gone wrong in somebody's life. And it could be poverty, generational poverty. It could be a mental health challenge or a physical disability, loss of a job, even a substance abuse issue. You wrap all those things together into a person, and odds are you may have come to see us at the Haven. That's the challenging group that we're hosting on many nights, is folks who have severe barriers to being rehoused. as well as the history, maybe evictions, bad credit, no credit. All of those fun things kind of help and lend themselves to somebody not being able to be rehoused quickly. And in this market, which is very, very challenging market to find housing, landlords can kind of pick and choose who they want to, and rightly so. They should pick and choose who's they're going to rent to. But the challenged who have barriers to being rehoused, we work with them pretty significantly over time to help them get back into housing. So, long answer to your question.
Right. That's one of the things that we see the most is being able to find someone housing,
Right.
suitable housing for their circumstances or for their needs. So like you mentioned, evictions, bad credit, no credit, those seem to be the eviction part. Seems to be one of the biggest barriers that we deal with on a basis, a daily basis. And the folks that there are some landlords in our community that will give a little on that, but they're few and far between. And like you said, there are I think maybe it's just because we pay attention to it more, but since COVID, I really think that the housing market has just imploded and there is nowhere to put a lot of these folks. And they're every day we have maybe, I don't know, what would you say, 10, 12 folks that come to us and say, I'm homeless or about to be homeless.
I need housing.
Yep.
Right.
I don't disagree with you. Maybe I wouldn't look at it as the housing market's imploded. I think the competition for housing has exploded.
Right.
And the supply of housing has not changed, really.
Right.
And maybe it's gone down. Battle Creek as a community probably for the last 30 years, no pointing fingers of blame on us. We as a community, everybody in it, we have disinvested in our housing stock in the last 30 years. Apartment buildings that have had issues have just been knocked down and not rebuilt. Entire complexes have been knocked down and not rebuilt. I think if you took a number of housing units we had in the city 30 years ago versus today, it'd be drastically reduced. Just because we spent a lot of money in federal grant dollars and everything else removing housing that was not safe or deemed unsafe or deemed detrimental to neighborhoods, we just knocked houses down. And we paid good money to do that.
It's because they thought they were blight, and instead of fixing those houses up with those grant fundings, it was
cheaper to knock
them down. Correct.
Well, and for someone like me, I guess, who doesn't know a lot about like how funding and things like that work, it's hard to understand how massive projects that I would imagine cost a lot of money. They're huge, beautiful, gorgeous buildings downtown that a very specific population can only afford. Yet 2 blocks away, there's thousands of homeless people a year.
Per year.
Per year.
Right.
So that's kind of like hard to understand.
It's a market-based kind of response, and the beautiful buildings you're talking about downtown were needed and funded for a purpose, for housing, to try and revitalize downtown. The affordable housing side of things, though, that the lower end of the economic spectrum needs, we have not, as a community, built those kind of houses in the last 30 years. We've knocked them down, and so. We find ourselves here today in a very competitive housing market with very little affordable housing available.
Right.
And it's very challenging.
And so when we did some research and we figured that, if a person makes $15 an hour, a full-time person, they're going to make about $520 a week before taxes. That roughly is about $27,000 annually. And in order to get into most of your apartment complexes, you have to make 2 or 3 times the rent just to be able to move into those houses. So that kind of separates a whole part of our community. It separates like anyone who's on disability or Social Security. A lot of those folks are making the bare minimum of $800 a month, and there's no way that they can make triple the rent or any of that kind of thing. And so then you factor in those other things they have to have, like they have to be able to pay utilities, they have to have food. If you're a mom and you have 2 children, you need a 2-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom apartment, and the waiting lists in Battle Creek are just they're huge. They are just extreme. And so like that's why we always look to like the Housing Commission or to Neighborhoods Inc. for assistance in trying to help us place our folks and find housing for them. But then there's barriers associated with those too, you know, like no evictions, you can't have any past due bills, and so then things just start to stack up against them. And so then sometimes we see someone who is homeless in our community, we see them suddenly become like just disengaged completely from even trying to find housing because you know, we don't like to set our folks up for failure. And so when we go into a situation with them, we explain to them all the ins and outs as they move forward. But it seems to me that the more they try to gain upward mobility, the harder the hill gets for them, and they become tired, so to speak.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's work.
Yeah, and I mean, we have a member who said to me last week, she's like, look, I put in all the footwork, I've done everything you've asked me to do, and I'm still at square one and nothing is moving forward to me. I'm becoming I want to give up. And so I think that that's really what we look at in our community is how do you help these folks no matter what situation they're in? Like, you know, you mentioned, you know, loss of a job. That could be detrimental to the family within a matter of a week if you're
2
living
weeks,
paycheck to paycheck. And a lot of landlords now have a waiting list. And so they're not going to let you go a month or 2 months without paying rent. They're going to immediately start to put in the process to have you removed from their property.
Right.
And even though our courts are backlogged and you're still waiting 30 or 45 days to get a court date, they don't care. That money's still racking up and you're still going to owe
Right.
that money. And now you have an eviction on your record that says you owe this landlord $4,000 and it looks like you don't pay your bills. And so here we go again, you know?
Right.
So I think all of it together really makes for a strong case for Battle Creek and our community moving forward to look at something that's a little different. Like tiny homes. We've talked about tiny homes for years, and Women's Co-op in partnership with where we're housed at, Trinity Lutheran Church, is doing some work on trying to look at a feasibility study to see what that would look like to place some tiny homes in our area. We also, you know, like revamping some mobile home parks. There are a couple in our community who are playing loose and free with the rules. And so, you know, we really want to see some of that taken over and kind of things help to motion folks in the right direction. So
I don't disagree with you on going back to the earlier piece you said, somebody that's making $15 an hour, right? A single income at that level probably cannot afford a market rate apartment, certainly. That kind of an $800, $1,000 a month rent to them would create what they call a housing burdened situation, and they would not have money for utilities or a car or insurance or some of the other, you know, even basic needs like food,
Right.
things like that would be a challenge for that family. If you have two income families, you know, either a roommate or a spouse or something like that, you've got a leg up. You know, and that's just now happening. That's kind of the environment has changed in Battle Creek within the last 3 years since the pandemic. And again, it goes to COVID, it goes to the availability of housing. If you look at other cities in our state, like Detroit, like Grand Rapids, maybe even closer to home. Grand Rapids, market rate apartments up there are $1,600, $2,000 for 2-3 bedroom places. It's just the market, and the market has changed. I mean, that's an environmental change that affects all of us. Kalamazoo, same situation, a very competitive housing market. And so now it's come to Battle Creek, and everybody facing this kind of situation in Battle Creek has got an environment that's changed. And we as a species need to be adaptable to change. And so looking at those adaptations, what's needed? Number one is better paying jobs. If we can get those $20 an hour jobs or $25 an hour jobs, you're seeing pressure on wages come up all across the city. I see it at the Haven and what we have to pay our folks. And we're trying to improve the base we pay our folks as quickly as we can, as quickly as resources allow.
right.
But that being said, we have to get those kind of jobs here as a community. And so when we see employers coming to town, maybe that Ford battery plant in Marshall will bring those kind of dollars to town for workers in that plant. Where are those workers going to live? They're going to also compete for housing between Marshall and Battle Creek too. That can be an opportunity for us as this environment change. Are we prepared for it? Are we prepared to see plant workers making $20-25 an hour coming after the affordable and available housing stock here? We as a community probably need to do a good hard look at that and say, okay, where are we going to put 2,000 workers, 3,000 workers?
That was my next question for you. So as this continues to happen, say that the market continues to go up and we're chasing the higher paying jobs and hoping everything works out that way, how might that look for the Haven?
As we're serving in this end of the spectrum, right, of somebody with very little or no resources, and they need emergency housing. That's our role for 30 to 60 days, maybe 90 days while somebody gets their feet underneath them. But all of those things that we're in a holistic way looking at the family or looking at the individual, let's build a job. Let's connect you with it. And even the basics of getting a job, like let's get you an ID that's legal and shows your address so that you can apply for a job.
Right.
These are steps that all of us are very familiar with. Or is there a substance abuse issue? First, we need to clean that up, and then we can start to work on getting you a job. So all the ministries and programs at the Haven are designed to focus on, let's build you up to that point where you're ready to take the step into independent housing, or in transitional housing even, something of that nature. Those are the ways that affects the Haven. We're right there, always have been at the end of the spectrum where somebody's just starting out or has nothing. And that's our role, and I'm happy to be there and serve, and we do that with excellence through our ministries. But yeah, it's a challenge to move people past that threshold of, okay, you've been here 90 days, you've got a job, you've got income, now what?
Right.
And so in this competitive market, we need to evolve a little bit too. As a group, and the Haven participates in the groups in town of the Housing Commission or the Homeless Solutions Board, all of those groups are looking and willing, I think, to look at ideas to create affordable housing in Battle Creek. I think we're all on board with, yes, we should do this.
Right.
Sometimes you can say, well, this is, here's $500,000 for this problem. Well, it's not a $500,000 problem.
Right.
It's a $5 million problem or a $25 million problem. So where do we go to find those kind of resources? And government programs exist for tax credits and tax support and governmental dollars that do those things. It's having an entity in town that's very effective at doing those things. And a couple of years ago, the city of Battle Creek commissioned a study by an out-of-town consultant that said, let's look at the environment of affordable housing. What are we missing? And we've got all the pieces of the puzzle except for one entity they called the curator. It's kind of a quarterback to put the team together to make this happen somewhere. And that's the one thing that this town still is missing 3 or 4 years after that study has been done. And that's nobody's fault. It's just the environment in Battle Creek, that's what we're missing. And maybe that's a $500,000 problem. But the bigger picture is, yeah, this is a $25 or $30 million problem, maybe more than that, to build the kind of housing that we've destroyed or disinvested in the last 30 years. And if we really want to position ourselves well for the future, to have good quality housing in safe neighborhoods here for the folks that are coming into town for these high-paying jobs, we need to be ready for that.
So what do you see a lot at the Haven? I know you have women and children and men and single dads and all of that, but do you tend to see now in this day and age, do you tend to see a lot of folks who are chronically homeless, who continue to revisit the shelter even after the 30, 60, 90-day kind of thing? Or, I mean, we see it.
Sure.
Folks get an apartment, they get a job, things are going well, and then something throws them off. Mental health or substance abuse or whatever that case may be. And Kayla and I were talking the other day about, I never really realized how large of a substance abuse and mental health issue there is in our community. until the last, I don't know, maybe the last year. We've really dealt with it a lot more. And I think that as our training program grew larger, we had more interaction with folks. So I think maybe that's why we've seen it a little more. But as case managers, we see it a lot now.
Yeah. The
And-
training program you're referring to is your Women's Co-op employment training.
That's
Which
correct.
is very, very effective. Thank you for having that program. You've
We
placed a lot
enjoy
of
it.
people through the Haven
Yes.
into this program, and thank you for that.
Yes.
You guys are great.
We love our Haven guys.
We do. They work every day.
To come back around to your question, what part does substance abuse and mental health play in that? It plays a huge part. I think, and this is my own personal opinion, in the last 3 years, the unsheltered population in Battle Creek has kind of segregated it, made itself into 3 tiers that are really distinct, serviceable tiers in my mind. Top, or whatever tier, the first tier you want to talk about, and let's not put them at the top, let's just say this tier is very functional, high functionality, maybe even has an income and a job. It's just down on the transmission, dropped out of their car or something. They missed a bill. Like you said, the landlord may have sold a house from under them and
Right.
decided, I don't want tenants anymore because now I can move you out. Whatever the reason, they're homeless. And they come to us, and in their functional state, we can get them rehoused in a matter of weeks. They're very functional, no barriers to being rehoused, and that's great. God bless them, on their way.
Right.
You've got a couple of weeks. There's a middle tier of unsheltered folks who really, really like the system we have in town, and they bounce between shelters, and they take advantage of all the free meals and the free cable TV and the free showers and free laundry and everything else that we're offering, and that's our chronically homeless population, and they're doing great right now. Honestly, they're taking advantage of the system that we have created to support them, and it's all well and good. We serve them like we would anybody else. That's the folks we see quite often, rotating between shelters.
Are you saying they want these people?
Yes, they don't
They
enjoy being told what to do or have burdens and responsibilities. They don't want anybody to tell them what to do. They want to be able to sit in the park and watch traffic go
Okay.
by. But nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's their choices. That's the middle tier. The tier that is really challenging is a group that is chronically homeless, has very, very high barriers to being rehoused, has criminal convictions, evictions, no credit, no job, no income, substance abuse, abuse issues, mental health issues, just all wrapped up into one,
Neat little package.
neat little package that is really challenging to rehouse somebody. And to look at this package takes a lot of hand-holding to get from day one to maybe day 180, 6 months later, where you are now clean and sober, and you've got an ID, and you've got income, and you're ready to move on to something in housing. So where do you go? That's the challenging tier that we deal with most day in and day out. You're absolutely right. The community has a substance abuse issue, and that was identified in our community health needs assessment done by the hospitals and the community earlier this year. Number one issue, substance abuse and mental health.
Yep.
And access to that kind of care.
Right. Well, as we wrap up another session of Our View, we want to thank Daniel for coming to visit with us this evening and for all your insight and your wisdom. Thank you as always, and thank you for all that you do in the community and the Haven.
Yes.
We certainly appreciate you and all that you do. So join us again next time, same station, same time. And we thank you for all joining us this evening, and have a wonderful evening.